All right. Welcome, everyone. Really glad that you could join us today. We have a great conversation lined up, and I do mean a conversation because we've got two fantastic panelists here who are going to do a whole lot of the heavy lifting on this one. Our topic today, the collaboration versus governance trade-off, is outlining the tension between where lawyers actually want to work and then where firms need content to live and some of the friction that that might create. So we're going to dig into why that is, where it breaks down, and maybe most importantly, what you could do about it. Quick note on the format before we get into it. We're going to do 45 minutes and then some questions in that GoToWebinar panel. We'll get to those at the end. Okay, so we have our confidentiality and disclaimer. This is going to allow for candid conversation. You know, some of the things here, we want to make sure we're getting real feedback. So please, what you see here, do keep it here, besides the lessons learned, of course. And just a couple of housekeeping notes that I mentioned at the top there. Feels a little bit like doing those plain presentations. We're going to go 45 minutes plus a Q&A. Please drop questions in the GoToWebinar panel as we go, and we'll make sure we have time for those in the last 10, 15 minutes. Anything we can't cover, we'll follow up with via email. You'll also get a replay link afterwards. Everyone is muted to keep things clean. We're being recorded, so don't sweat about that. We're not going to put that out in the replay whatsoever. All right. Welcome in again. Here are the three of us today. So I'm the least interesting, Derek Erickson, product value engineer at Litera. I get to show up and show off some of our solutions. But we also have Gianni Sawyer, who's on our product side. Gianni, if you'd like to introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. As Derek said, Gianni Sawyer, one of the product managers here at Litera. So I work predominantly in the governance portfolio on CAM and a couple of and PS ship also. And I'm excited to go through this today with you.
All right. Thank you. And then from the customer side, probably our VIP today, Ashok Krathia, welcome in. Can I get a brief introduction?
Hey everyone. Yeah, thank you guys for having me. My name's Ashok. I'm a senior systems engineer at Bristow's. So I help oversee a lot of the infrastructure and security stuff and implementation of new products. So that's why I'm here, I guess.
Yeah, because
I really need to update my LinkedIn picture, I guess.
I think of that a lot of times when I come in here. All right. Coming along, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the trade-off itself, why teams in the DMS are fundamentally in a tension and why that tension often does not resolve on its own. We're going to walk through the 4 failure modes where some of these things actually break. And then after that, Ashok's going to walk us through the Bristow story, which I'm really looking forward to because it's the one thing to talk about this problem in the abstract and another thing entirely to hear from someone who's actually solved it. And then, we're going to get in a little bit more, and Gianni's going to help us with the Litera perspective on some of our design principles. Then we're going to wrap up with practical next steps before opening up the floor. So we want to leave you with something helpful as well. All right, setting the stage. Here's our core tension, and it is a real one. We have Microsoft Teams. It boasts speed, ease of use, real-time collaboration. It's where the lawyers actually want to work. And it's difficult to argue with because those adoption numbers don't lie. On the other side, we have the DMS, which is the focus on control, compliance, audit trails, that system of record. And both of these things are, of course, extremely useful systems. The problem is that in a lot of firms, they're operating as if they're in competition with one another. All right. Yeah. Ashok, oh yeah, Johnny, please, you have some notes here.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say, so Microsoft Teams and Office 365, it already exists in firms, organizations. So the attorneys are already using it even before they even get to doing billable work on their matters. And so the habit to go and use Teams is always there, and it's something that we can't ignore, as you say.
Mm-hmm. And from a product standpoint, like when you think about the trade-off between Teams and the DMS, is it something that you hear about a lot from firms, or does it still kind of catch people off guard, if we were to put it in those terms, that there is this kind of tension or this kind of trade-off?
Yeah, so I think it is something that we hear a lot, and I think people are massively aware now more than ever that content is landing in the Office 365 ecosystem, Teams being the most common because it's the path of least restriction. We know that from the end users, they want to stay there because of the ease of use, as we've already talked about. But then for the kind of administrators and the people that are responsible for information governance, that can create a headache, because if you're not set up properly, then those spaces are ungoverned, and then it becomes.
Oh, Johnny might have froze up a little bit. Ashok, are you seeing that as well? Make sure it's not me. All right, Johnny, I'm so sorry, brother. You have frozen up a little bit. But Ashok, if I could turn it over to you, before you had a solution in place, again, this tension between Teams and the DMS, how did this show up at Bristow's day-to-day? Was it something that, you know, people were complaining about, or was this more of like a slow background problem that nobody had quite named yet?
Sure. It was more of an IT issue for us than a user problem, if I'm honest, because our policy was always to make sure documents are in the DMS.
Right.
And for them, Teams is so easy to use. It's just they'd rather go down that route. So, yeah, it was more of an issue for us to fix.
Yes. The people who can see what's going on, as opposed to the users who are humming about just kind of doing what they do day to day. And Gianni, apologies. Yeah, you froze up there, but I did really appreciate that about, you know, the undeniability around some of the changes that are happening with these environments commingling there. So I really appreciate the insight. All right, come along here. So there are two paths that most firms take when they hit this tension, more than that, but we're going to boil it down a little bit. And, you know, both of them have their risk and their failures. With option A, if you force everyone to the DMS, right, it has great governance, maybe lower adoption. And the biggest issue that I've seen just in my working with governance tools, users find workarounds. They always find workarounds. And then with option B, you kind of let, you know, Teams do its thing, so it has great adoption. But in a lot of instances, that governance goes completely out the window, and the content becomes, you know, kind of sprawls everywhere. And it's a really helpful key insight on the slide, because it reframes the conversation. It's not as much a user problem as a system design problem. The users aren't being difficult. It just feels like the systems are asking them to do something that doesn't fit how they naturally work. Is that, you know, something that you're seeing show up as well, Gianni?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, forcing users to the DMS logically on paper seems like the best solution, because it gives you everything you need. It ticks all the boxes. In the real world, we see that users, as we keep saying, they'll find workarounds if they don't find that DMS experience to be as frictionless as using Teams or anything like that. When you do go to allowing Teams, allowing your users to use Teams, then, like we say, that adoption is already there, and people already know how to use it. The issue is then, if it's not set up correctly and you haven't got the controls and the right infrastructure in place, that's an ungoverned environment. So straight away, you're increasing that risk profile. So this is where it's being framed as a trade-off.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and Ashok, did Bristow's fall into one of these camps? I mean, obviously with best practices, you touched on a little bit earlier, we want people working here in the DMS, but they found their way. Obviously, they're already using Teams. What did the pressure, was there pressure when the cracks started to show? You mentioned floating up to that IT level when seeing, we've got to do something about this.
Yeah, so the policy was to force people into DMS, make sure they work through iManage. But if you give someone Teams as a tool, it's hard to say, oh, only use these select few features of it, but this other bit, can you make sure you go back to the DMS for? And yeah, if it's something they're using day to day and it's in front of them, they're going to naturally sort of gravitate towards just making their life easier and doing more of their work in there.
Yeah, something I was told when I worked in firms was that if you can avoid asking someone to go somewhere else to finish a workflow, or even open an attachment. But in this case, okay, you can take it up to this far with this system, but then I need you to go to this system to do this portion. You can come back in here afterwards. They just fall off. The eyes gloss over, and they have a lot of other work going on. So that sounds very familiar. All right, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, next slide here. Perfect. All right, so this is where we start to try and name the problem with a little bit more precision, because I think it helps to have vocabulary for it, right? We can pin it down. If we can define it, we can solve it. It's the 4 failure modes, things that we're dealing with: duplication, version control, the security gaps, and then the operational drag. And every single one of these has a dollar amount attached to it, even if the firms aren't always tracking it explicitly. Yeah, Gianni, is this something that you're seeing when you're talking to some of these? Is, firms are obviously coming up with one or more of these issues they're brushing up against.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the more conversations we have in this space, the more we come to realize that actually all of these 4 failure modes exist to an extent or a lesser extent. If you've got a situation where you're trying to mandate a very rigid policy in terms of how users work, and it's not matching their requirements in the real world, then when they start performing their workarounds, you're going to get things like duplication, because that document, as we said, is going to live in multiple places. You're going to lose that version control as well, because people could be working on that document across 3 different systems, and those systems aren't talking to each other. But the security gaps as well, which is absolutely huge, making sure that content doesn't fall into the wrong hands. And like you said, operational drag, just to try and resolve or try and be reactive to some of those issues, that creates the drag. What we want to do really is get out in front of it and kind of prevent it in the first place.
Absolutely. And that risk aversion piece too, again, the security gap, users are going to do what they're going to do. And a lot of times that means, I want to access this document elsewhere. Now it's copied outside of a governed system. It's just out there in the wild. And so, Gianni, from a product standpoint, which of these failure modes do you consider like hardest to solve technically? And which one do you hear about most consistently from some of our prospects?
Okay. So I think that technically, I would say the version control piece, mainly because even though we can fill the hole and we can make sure that content is governed, unless there is guardrails put in place, training put in place, I guess operating procedures put in place, there is going to be times where some of your users may migrate to the DMS to do something, when you may have 99% of your kind of workforce going to Teams.
Right.
So there's a piece around that isn't necessarily a technical solution. That's a human solution, and often the humans are the hardest ones to kind of pin down.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Little risk factories running around. Yeah. And Ashok, you're in the mix here. So, of these 4, the duplication, version control, security gaps, operational drag, which one was the most painful at Bristow? And was there a specific incident that maybe made leadership take it seriously? Like, we got to get a solution to this.
Sure. No specific incident, but operational drag's probably the biggest one for us. The DMS is our source of truth for client matter files. And when people start working on documents outside of that, there was a manual process in place to make sure at the end of a matter or a project, someone puts those client files back in there. And that's the biggest one for us.
And that's going to be consistent, exactly. That's going to be just part of the operations. And that operational drag, it's interesting because it seems like it'd be the hardest one to put a number on. Just a question to either of you, how are you making the case that this is a real cost and it's beyond just an annoyance?
So from my perspective, I would really start to think about what are the kind of people hours that go into moving
Right.
content around upon things like matter closure, or having to train and write documentation and policies around best practices. Um, and also where you've got people in your teams that are just looking for content when they should be billing hours. That's something to think about as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I think of. That like making space for them to work on the more impactful things and not worrying about these things because we can have that all covered. I like that a lot. All right, let's hum it along a bit. Great. So we're connecting those failure modes to some real world impact, which we've already heard a little bit about. The risk exposure, lost time, poor client experience. With the risk, you see that one's more apparent in my opinion. You see sensitive documents outside governed systems. You have broken audit trails where it says, well, here's where it was, last time. 6 months ago, it's off. Regulatory exposure, again, that risk piece. And then the lost times we touched on with the operational drag, attorneys or just users hunting for the right version, IT scrambling to reconcile these systems. And then with that poor client experience, that's that interaction that you're having with the people that matter most, both either as customers or as clients. And so when you have delays, they get the wrong version that's gone out in an email there, or inconsistent communication. That really does have an impact that scales up. And they're not independent problems, right? They compound each other. Some of that version confusion can create client experience problems. Security gaps create the risk exposure, and that operational drag slowing down the people trying to, fix the other three of these. And Johnny, when firms are in evaluation mode, do they typically come in kind of already knowing which impact area they're most worried about, or does that clarity come a little later in the conversation?
From my experience, I think there's typically a very core reason that's triggered them to look at this problem. And then I think by virtue of looking at that problem and seeking help and understanding what they can do with that, they start to see some of the benefits in the other areas as well. So typically an event or acknowledgement that something needs to change will drive this conversation. And as you say, it could be that risk exposure piece. It could be an acknowledgement or reporting or metrics around the amount of time that we're not billing and that time that's lost to reconcile content. Or even, dare I say it, you get feedback from your clients that something's gone wrong. And it only takes one to really impact that reputation. And that is enough to really start thinking about, okay, what changes do we need to make?
Absolutely. All right. Well, and so we're seeing what that, we've set up some of those failure modes. We're seeing how they might actually impact some of those operations. If we could go to the next slide, please. Because this is the part that I've really been looking forward to. We spent the first half of this webinar really talking about the problem in the abstract, but Ashok's going to tell us what it actually looked like to live it and then solve it at Bristow. So Ashok, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Derek. For us, the story really starts in 2020. Like everyone here, we got hit by the pandemic. Overnight, Teams went from being a nice to have to an absolute essential. It was a tool that made remote work impossible for us. And we had a big push to roll it out, get everyone on it, get them confident using it. And what we initially deployed as a meetings, chats, and the obvious things tool. But what happens when you put a powerful platform in the hands of lawyers is they start clicking around, they start experimenting, and pretty quickly they discovered Teams isn't just a meeting tool. And you can call the documents in it. You can get automatic incremental version saves. You can work on the same files with your colleagues in real time. And it works across multiple devices. And at the time, it wasn't functionality iManage had. So organically, without anyone in IT pushing it, Teams became the place where document work was happening. And because it was genuinely a better experience for certain kinds of collaboration. So that left us with a question every firm in that position has to answer. Do we lock it down or do we work with it? Our IT policy at the time was always work in iManage. And this is the important bit. If you choose to work in Teams or SharePoint for a piece of collaboration, we'll allow it. We deliberately didn't want to put technological blocks in place in the way people are using the tools that help them do their job more efficiently. So the trade for that flexibility was simple. We put the onus on the users to make sure the documents end up back in iManage at the end of the matter. And the problem with that policy before Content Mover was the round trip. The agreement was that everything moved from Teams to iManage manually at the end of the project, which meant someone had to periodically copy documents across. And from a IT perspective, it was very hard to confirm whether it actually been done or not. And there was no direct link between team sites and iManage workspaces. So we're trusting that the process had happened with no easy way to validate it. And that's the gap Content Mover closed for us. And so we became aware of CAM when we were looking at, and I'm moving to iManage Cloud in 2023. And we'd actually been looking at for Teams to iManage sync tools for a while before that. And we'd had conversations with Prosperaware before Litera acquired them. And we knew CAM had this Content Mover feature. And that was one of the main reasons in 2023 when we went to iManage Cloud. And we got CAM initially for the workspace provisioning piece, but with the knowledge of it's got the Content Mover feature that we can turn on when we're ready. And so, yeah, that's how we've been using CAM initially for workspace provisioning. And now with Content Mover, when a new matter spins up in our PMS system, CAM creates a team site, the iManage workspace, and using predefined sort of naming convention, we link the two together from day one. That means we can maintain a full life cycle of the client matter properly because the systems aren't strangers to each other anymore. And Content Mover specifically, the main thing it solved for us was time. We're no longer relying on someone to manually copy documents across at the end of the matter. Content flows back to iManage automatically. We get the assurance that the system of record is complete and the lawyers don't have to do anything. And the policy always work in iManage, but if you go elsewhere, get it back actually works in practice now because the get it back happens by itself with Content Mover.
And the neat part about it, I think about, obviously pandemic hits, everyone's being dynamic. Once again, users go where they go. There's an organic move to some of these different workflows because it was the easiest for them. And so now you're looking at that behavior and are trying to manage on top of it. And I was laughing a little bit because, when they go into Teams, as you touched on, I love that piece about they found out it was for more than just meetings because there are all these neat features and capabilities, but without any kind of solution around them, it becomes chaos when instead, you should be getting the most out of some of these tools. So that's a little bit about what I heard is like, all right, well, great. Now that we have this in place, all of these tools are once again features instead of a potential failure points there. I also heard a little bit about that project piece. Like we're going to start here, then we're going to move to this, and then starting to unravel some of the different capabilities as you bring it into some of the workflows. Gianni, is that something that you see a lot when we're talking? Because it can be really overwhelming to say we have to fix this whole problem. And here's CAM and Content Mover. We can fix your whole problem, but they don't want to do everything maybe at once. Like, do you usually talk to firms or just customers about a project methodology, about increasing that use, adding some of these features as they're bringing the solution up to life?
Absolutely. It's not a binary thing. And actually, each of the different features that CAM offers solves different problems. So as Jacques referenced the provisioning piece, now when when we provision the iManage workspaces along with the team at the same time, can build the knowledge that that team is linked to that iManage workspace. And actually what that does is say, okay, even before you start to think about moving content back into the system of record to kind of close that loop, we can control the security and access centrally across both those systems in one place. So if you've got leavers, joiners, group membership changes, then we can pick that up and we can manage that for you. So we're putting the foundations in place for even get people to work in a governed location. Right. So and again, just touching on kind of what Ashok was saying, once you provide that solid place for people to go and do the work and collaborate, then behind the scenes we can go and grab that content and bring it back. And actually that's kind of invisible to the user. We don't have to tell them it's going on. I know Ashok was saying it'll be nice for them to know what was going on. So I think Ashok wants to get some credit on his implementations. But
you got it.
But for the end users, they haven't got to think about it. They haven't got to read a policy document. They haven't got to follow rules.
And I just think about every one of those things that you mentioned that they have to do as part of that process, and that being manual every step of the way, with opportunities for things to fall off, misses to happen, just that increase of risk. And so once again, we're going through like, oh, well, then X, Y, and Z happens. Well, all of these required maybe different teams or different users or what have you, different processes that were manual. So huge lift being able to kind of have all of that squared away. Ashok, was there a moment where you knew that you had the right solution? You know, was it like a specific thing that Content Mover did that really made it click, or was it just kind of an elevation of the best practices and being able to not worry about that piece?
For us, I think knowing it's a background process that's always happening and it's not something we have to consciously pay attention to, that was key, because we took the onus off the user. And now they no longer have to worry about moving stuff from Teams into iManage when the matter's closed. And yeah, they can use that energy to do something more productive, really.
There you go. And maybe something they'd be more glad to engage with than maybe some of the admin that it was otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I said this is the important piece here, where we have someone who's using the tools, seeing what it's like out there. And so we really appreciate the feedback and just the insight into what that looks like. All right. Well, let's see a little bit more about how, there we go, the Litera perspective here. And a big part of that is how we're solving for this and what that means. So the framing here is the right one. We want to stop forcing a choice, because leading firms don't pick Teams or the DMS, as Ashok alluded to. You know, here are these two great tools. We don't want to stand in the way. And so instead of forcing a choice, we're able to connect them with clear roles for each of the systems. And then, you know, that collaboration starts where the work actually happens. The governance is where it actually matters. And then you have that clear system of record and then some controlled movement between the two. Gianni, if you could just walk us through the model a little bit. You know, Teams for drafting and collaboration, CAM Move for that controlled content flow, DMS for the final storage and governance. How is CAM making that handoff work in practice?
Yeah, so when we even at the point of provisioning, we're already starting to build that profile of the notion of a essentially a workspace kind of ecosystem. So we know that there's a specific iManage workspace that needs to connect with a Microsoft team, and like we said before, that sets the foundation then for the perspective we have here. So the collaboration where the work happens. So the drafting, the commenting, the co-authoring, that's all happening in Teams or SharePoints, and we don't want to stop that. So we want to make sure that that space is governed and it's connected to your iManage workspace, so that when we need to move that content, we can do that. We also make sure that all of the profile of that document in terms of the metadata, that's preserved, because we have a super rich metadata mapping as well. The system of record, we always honor that. So we're never going to push on a preference for the system of record, traditionally it's the DMS, and we will always honor that, and our tool respects that. So if you want to build the processes to bring that content back into the DMS, then absolutely, it's there. It's there. It's there to be used. There's also a way to move content from the DMS out to the collaboration spaces as well. So if you've got the need to do that as well, we can support that. And we control that movement between the systems, and we do it on an automated basis. It's scheduled. It doesn't get in the way of the end users. And the point here is that we just don't want to provide any barriers for the natural flow of collaboration, because humans do their best work when they're in their favorite environments, and this is what this is enabling.
I love that. That's a great takeaway. Humans do their best work when they're in their favorite environments. That's absolutely the case. And, again, as changes happen too, which they often do, CAM being able to pick some of that up and be dynamic and be able to, as you said, what do you want your system of record to be? Be able to work with customers where they're at in the way that their best practices, inform, and not having to reduce or take away some of those tools that are being used by some of the folks there. That's really helpful, and make sure that we're not missing out on anything that would be helpful to the work that's being done, especially that collaboration piece. Ashok, did you feel like you guys were a little ahead of the curve on this? I mean, or did, when you were evaluating CAM, did this open your eyes to how much room for improvement there really was? Like, oh, I didn't realize that it was possible to not have all of these pieces be controlled by our individual members of the team.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how ahead of the curve we were, but CAM and Content Mover, it was something we were, since COVID and going to teams and people using SharePoint as a place for documents, we were looking for a tool that fixed that gap. So it was something we were aware of. When we were looking around, it was hard to know how good CAM would do it compared to others. But CAM was the only product we evaluated, and it does it very well. So we didn't really have a reason to look at other products after that, to be honest.
I love that.
It moves documents from A to B and does it on the schedule we set it to, and it's sort of a configure and forget thing. And yeah, that's one less thing we have to worry about.
And as you were bringing CAM in, and obviously seeing how your users worked, and wanting to make sure that wasn't going to be impeded, did you find maybe like some new tools or capabilities? We're talking about like the security piece, beyond just the content mover, some new capabilities that you got into as you were implementing CAM and content mover. Like, was there some things you hadn't considered? Oh, we could actually do this as well, or oh, because it allows this, we can do XYZ. You can be honest.
So we did, like Gianni alluded to, test from iManage to Teams, the sync the other way, see how helpful that was. But we had the user base that it's rolled out with at the moment. They wanted to work primarily in SharePoint, and didn't care about working in iManage at all. And because the whole team wanted to work in just one environment, it was just easy to have the one-way flow and not worry about setting up a two-way sync and that sort of configuration, really.
That's fair enough. Still listening to the users and making the best practices around there so as not to impede. I mean, it's a good ethos that we've kind of heard throughout the presentation. All right. Coming along here. There we go. So this slide, it lays out kind of a model. Teams is where the drafting and collaboration happens. CAM Move handles the controlled content flow, and then the DMS is the final storage and that governance layer. 3 distinct roles, but allowing each system to do what it does best. And just to highlight a little bit what CAM enables here, the lawyers are working in teams because that's where they are. The documents are getting moved to the DMS with that metadata intact, and then that governance being applied consistently without anyone having to think about it. And then, some of those zero trust security policies that travel with the content across the system. And Gianni, I meant to ask on that last slide there, can you talk to us a little bit about, in more plain terms, the zero trust security policy enforcement and how that interacts with the environments, with the documents, and some of the benefits that come from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're provisioning those workspaces, we want to make sure that the security lists are populated in the same way across all of the connected systems for that workspace. So what that means is the same level of access you get in the DMS is also applied to Teams. So if I'm not able to work on Ashok's matter in DMS, then there's no reason why I should be able to get access to that in Teams. So we want to make sure that that security model is applied across all of the connected systems. As we say, if you've got that DMS workspace, iManage in Bristow's example, and you've got a team site or a SharePoint site, at that point of provisioning, we are going to set that security for all three, and we are going to ensure that that security model is replicated across all three.
Mm-hmm. And not having to, something I say a lot when talking about governance products is not having to rebuild the architecture for each of these different systems, not having to, eliminating the risk potential of not having that same security attached to these different users, groups, roles, what have you, within those systems. And that's, you touched on a little bit too, but the metadata piece, which is one of those things that I think sounds simple to a lot of non-users, maybe in the audience, and me when I first came into governance. But the metadata piece is really critical. So how's CAM handling that application and the movement of the metadata for documents? And just because I know a little bit about it, changes that happen as well to metadata, how is CAM handling those?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we touched on that previously. So everything that CAM needs to do, it needs to speak that language out to the external systems. And the way we do that is to map universal metadata in CAM to system level metadata. So the metadata you hold in Office 365 and Teams might be different to the metadata fields that you have in iManage. So there needs to be that consistent piece that connects the two, and that's where CAM comes in. So when you're moving content out from the DMS to Office 365, we will make sure that metadata moves with it as well. If you've got any defined filters around your content in terms of is it specific pieces of content or types of content that you want to move, then we can use metadata to kind of help with that as well. And same way, when that content comes back in from Teams to the DMS or Office 365 to the DMS, any changes there as well are going to flow through back to the DMS also. And when that content does arrive in the DMS, we can also start to apply kind of any default metadata as well. And so we want to make sure that at all points in this process, the profile on that content is properly satisfied, and that also helps for potentially a bigger conversation around how the AI tools start to consume that content.
Oh, that is interesting. That is interesting, the AI tool piece. I also think about the metadata being specific points associated with, workspace, or associated with, the content. There's the role-based metadata as well, kind of going into some of that security, right? Where we're able to pull some of those various roles and assign those based off of maybe the matter in a law firm instance, to make sure that if those are changing, which a lot of times they will, that we're making sure that updates similarly for that security based on the role, not necessarily the individual.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Right? Yeah, absolutely. So where we've got, for example, like we said, user changes in your Active Directory or Enter ID or group membership changes, then we can react to that.
Right. Fantastic. All right, humming along a little bit. There we go. All right, so we wanted to leave with some practical next steps that can be taken away here. And so we're coming up on the Q&A, so I want to make sure that we have something concrete. Let me just check in there. Perfect. I know there are folks in the audience who are in the middle of evaluating this exact problem and would like to know, hopefully, where do I actually start? And so we've given just a few questions to ask internally. And that is, where are the users actually working? That was part of what Ashok and his team really understood was, all right, we've got a change in dynamic. They're working here now, doing these types of work in these types of systems. And so it's important to understand where they're actually at. And then where is content supposed to live? And supposed to, that could be the dream, right? Where do we hope that it lives? Where is it intended to, based off the type of content? And then what breaks when content moves between systems? And that is obviously the governance piece, making sure that when something is moving between a system, we're not losing the security, we're not losing any kind of policies attached to that content. As well as the metadata pieces themselves. So when things are moving, are they moving smoothly? Are we losing some of that? And then some improvements that we could chat about as well, right? Being able to define some of those system roles clearly. That again talks a little bit to the security piece and the access. A big part of what Ashok mentioned in his story, reducing manual movement. That is tremendous. It gets rid of all of those potential risks in those people steps. And then standardizing the content flows. So we understand that we have consistent naming, the metadata, that structure is going to exist between these different systems, reducing confusion and again, potentially security risks. So, if you do nothing else after today, just answering these 3 internal questions is going to be a lot more useful than a lot of project kickoffs that we've been a part of. Johnny, anything you'd like to add just as far as someone is in this problem right now, they want to start towards solving it. Anything that you talk to a lot of these firms or prospects that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing I would say is book a demo to see what this feature can do for you. Secondly, as with anything change related that is going to be consumed by effectively end users, is perform some discovery and engage some of those users and figure out what good looks like for them, because there is absolutely no need to actually go and implement something or a process that doesn't meet your kind of users' real needs and the real problems that they have. And obviously, if you've got kind of, like we said previously, if some of your risk vectors are causing you pain, then understand what those core challenges are and figure out the things you might need to do to kind of close those out. So for me, I think just spending a little bit of time to really dig in, form that discovery piece, and understand those core requirements you need to fill.
Thanks for the book a demo call out. Yes, please do. We'd love to show up and show off, as I mentioned at the top there. That's where I get to come in. Ashok, just if you could go back to the start of Bristow's evaluation process. I know you said you evaluated Content Mover and CAM, one and done. But is there a question that maybe you wished you would have asked earlier, either as far as evaluating a solution or maybe just internally, maybe before pandemic forced everybody into these different dynamics, a question that you could have asked internally to maybe kickstart this process a little sooner, saved you guys some headache?
No, not really, if I'm honest.
Fair enough.
Yeah, for us, the project went very well.
Good.
Because CAM is surgical and precise enough where we can just set up Content Mover with just one team, one iManage workspace.
Mm-hmm.
It was easy to find a small team within Bristow, say, hey, look, we're looking at this product.
Mm-hmm.
We know you like working in just SharePoint. Would you like to test it for us? We started with just a new matter and a new team. They started testing it, and then we slowly expanded. And then after we grew confidence in the product, we sort of opened it up to other teams. And yeah, it's just been slowly, we've been introducing newer teams to it at the moment.
I like that a lot. I mean, it sounds almost like the question wasn't so much a question as a realization of it doesn't have to be this way. And I hope, I think that might be the takeaway for some folks here. Hey, if you're dealing with a lot of the issues that we've kind of covered throughout the webinar today, it doesn't have to be this way. So please keep that in mind as a takeaway. All right. Johnny, Ashok, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate both of you bringing your full candor to this. And I do want to open up the floor to some questions. Let me get into my tab here. Thank you all. All right, we got a couple questions queued up. Johnny and Ash, feel free to jump in on any of these, even if it's kind of directed at the other person. We just something that's collaborative here. Here we go. Someone maybe hopefully this guy answered a little bit, but we have content scattered across Teams, SharePoint, and the DMS. Where do you even start cleaning that up without disrupting active matters? And I do want to preempt a little. Ashok, I think you killed it there by saying we started with this team and we started rolling it out a little bit more. But have we seen some more of that? Like, where do we start this large project without disrupting the work that's already going on?
I mean, for us, it was just start small, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, find small group people that have this issue and show them the solution and see how it works.
Perfect. Yeah, please, Johnny, you've been part of some of these projects, getting things rolling.
Yeah.
Obviously, they don't want to disrupt the work. What are some of the approaches that you've taken with this?
Yeah, so the beauty of this process is that if somebody is used to accessing a document in a certain location, that document is never going to go away. So even though we're talking about, even though it has a name of content mover, what we're effectively doing is making sure that content is synced across two locations. So I think the disruption can be kept to a minimum. And I think what Ashok was saying from their experience, start small, take the discovery process, form a hypothesis on how you want to solve it, and then try it out in that kind of real world scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously knowing where you want your system of record to be. So as I say, traditionally it's the DMS. If you've got a bigger problem in SharePoint, then okay, let's look at SharePoint first. Is it a particular practice area? Is it a particular team? Is it a particular office? Start to think about things that way and kind of break it down. And then once you get those processes kind of in place and you have happy stakeholders, then start thinking about scaling it out.
So my favorite kind of stakeholders. You mentioned it a couple times, and I think it's so important because it's a big part of Litera's ethos as well, that discovery piece. Actually understanding what are the workflows now, what are the best practices now, what is the pain and pain point, and that discovery portion being so crucial to wrapping our arms around the issue. And even if we're going to be approaching it in a kind of rollout in a project way where it starts small and grow, we still want to know what the vision is, what that end state will be, and then we can kind of work back and building out that plan, that project to get there. So I love that you've mentioned that because it's a big part of how I approach things, and I know about how Litera is emphasizing approaching things as well. Here's okay, we got a more practical question. Johnny, this one's you. How long does a typical CAM implementation take, and what should the firm have ready before they start?
So typical CAM implementation, I think if we're talking happy path and we're talking about getting your provisioning set up and getting content mover set up, then that can be done at this point in a few months, which sounds long, but actually that few months will actually encapsulate some of the kind of prep work that would need to be done on the client side as well. So first and foremost, we would need to make sure that your metadata is intact. We would help you with the kind of setup of any utilities that need to be installed kind of in the client ecosystem. We will help you out with all those connections, the creation of kind of service accounts, and to even get that point again, just thinking about, like Ashok was saying, in the provisioning space, some of the basics that sometimes get overlooked. So things like your workspace naming conventions, maybe it's a chance to simplify your templates. Any chance you've got to do a data cleanup or simplify things as part of this process is always something that we always suggest taking a look at.
Sort of similar to having guests over and now I'm motivated to tidy up my apartment, tidy up the rooms a little bit because we're gonna have someone come in. We're doing something there, so I like that a lot. And just here's kind of a general one here, but I like it. What's the thing about this topic that you think that firms, or we'll just say users or clients, most consistently underestimate? And I think I'm going to start. I think that the risk piece is something that I think a lot of customers or prospects underestimate how much risk is happening with these manual pieces, with work happening outside of these governed DMSs or just governed, systems in general, because one mistake can snowball and be a huge issue. And there's just a lot of, again, the human element there, ungoverned locations with real data, with real client information. It's a risky situation that maybe firm or just customers aren't thinking of. Hopefully not before it's too late, but just not day to day as they're just working as they would expect to work within these different systems. But I can open up a little bit. What are the consistently underestimating about this topic?
I think I'll jump in and I'll say I think people always underestimate maybe how severe some of these problems are.
Sure.
So I think that sometimes the data sprawl that occurs because people are collaborating in ungoverned spaces and they're sharing content through means and channels that aren't suitably governed. And I don't think that that data sprawl and that security risk is really known at its full level. And I think that with all the best will in the world, telling people how to do something and what to do in certain situations doesn't always mean that that's going to happen. So that's why I say, get down to the coal face and really speak to the people and figure out what's really going on.
I love that. Yeah, out of sight, out of mind in a lot of ways. All right. That is all of the questions that came through. So if we can push on to that last slide where I get an opportunity to thank you both, Johnny, Ashok, for a fantastic conversation. I always benefit from getting these insights as well. And so I really appreciate you spending the time with us today. For all of our audience, the replay will be in your inbox. And if you have any questions after this, when you've ruminated a little bit, you can absolutely follow up with us by email. And that link on the screen, our QR code, has more on cam if you'd like to keep exploring, or if you would like to schedule a demo. So please don't hesitate to reach out if any of this resonated with you. And again, thank you all so much. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you all.